The history of heavy.
Hello and welcome to episode 37 of the History of Heavy podcast, the show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. I am Michael Huntsman. That is Big Daddy Dave Lieberman. Hello, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing great tonight. How are you, Mike?
You look great. I am
great.
good. I mentioned last week that this episode tonight, in addition to last week's episode when we talked about Funkadelic's Maggot Brain, actually 2 weeks ago, we had to take a week break for you to settle into a new job. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I said that I was specifically excited about that episode and this episode because they both stray a little far afield from sonic heaviness, which I think adds an interesting layer to our conversation about heavy. So I'm very excited to get into tonight's topic. Also, tonight is our penultimate 1971 episode, which means not only are we about to slowly move into another year of the 70s, but it does also mean that we're getting closer to talking about Black Sabbath's third LP, Master of Reality. More on that later. Before we get into any of that stuff, I have to ask you the question, Dave. You sent me a text. I'd been reading the news. It's all over the place. In the context of heavy and our ongoing conversation, do we care that Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson are taking Rush back on the road again? What say you, Dave? Do we care?
Okay, I have duality here. I have duality here. We care. I support it. I think it's awesome. I'm not going to go.
Same.
You know, I want them to keep playing music. The music is awesome. So much of what Rush is, who Rush is, how they sound, their lyrics, like that's Neil Peart. That's Neil. And while Neil didn't ever do any singing, um, it still feels weird. It feels like, I don't know. Same with ZZ Top. You know, uh, they're still touring, and the guy who's taken over as bass was
Looks
like,
just like Dusty Hill.
he looks just like him, and he was his bass tech for like 40 or 50 years. I mean, these guys are old, and he was there from the beginning. So it's almost like there's no difference. But yeah, it takes a lot to get me to a show in the first place.
Right.
And I have seen Rush kind of from the nosebleeds at Shoreline, like, oh yeah, there they are, way down there.
That's probably them.
I think that the TV is them. I'm pretty sure the big giant TV screen at the show.
You
But
know,
yeah, so I think it's cool. I'm not going to go, but bless them.
I am totally with you, and I will reserve my broader experience and opinion and relationship with Rush for our Rush episode, which we will get to at some point in the not too distant future. But I'm with you on the legacy acts touring with the fragment of that band's existence. I mean, you mentioned ZZ Top, Rush, obviously power trios. It's more relevant because it's a third of the band that's not there. But my reaction when I see bands playing now still is I was looking at a list just today, the Regent Theater in LA, a cool theater that pretty worn down, but a cool downtown LA theater that has a lot of punk and metal shows still. I'm on their newsletter and I got it today, and I saw GBH was playing. And so my immediate reaction is like, wow, GBH. And I have to like immediately pull myself back and go, it's 2025. I don't want to see GBH in
That version.
2025.
Yeah.
That is a different thing. It's hardly the original lineup, but even that is like there's a certain point where you're a bit long in the and Rush is different. It's better you can play Rush's music at an advanced age more than you can play GBH's music at an advanced age, but still there's got to be a sell by date where it's just like okay, that's done. That band
Well,
live
and
is done.
okay, so that particular division, I really feel like is uh, adolescence and adult, right? Like
Mm.
GBH
Yeah,
is sonic
adolescence.
adolescence,
Right. That's true.
and Rush is sonic adulthood, and so you're an adult for the rest of your life. So you can pull off adulthood music. They that's why like they can just do that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like when we went and saw Danzig slash Misfits,
Yeah.
um, that was a good reminder. It's like, oh man, it occurred to me that I was at the show 25 years earlier when Danzig's first album came out, and it was so exciting and
Yeah.
fresh and relevant. And now here we are, and I'm like, oh, it's a little sad. It
And
feels.
he's still
I,
playing. That
and there's
was 10 years ago.
was it 10 years ago?
I
How long
mean,
was that?
yeah, it was before I moved to LA and back to LA in 2015 and it was when I was in San Francisco, so it was at least 10 years ago.
God,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
And it was
well,
Halloween, and
yeah.
my buddy, I remember seeing a buddy of mine, and I was like, dude, what are you doing here? He's like, dude, Danzig playing on Halloween. It's like seeing the Pope. Like if the Pope's in your town on Easter, you go.
I love it. Well, I will say that you're right. I like the adolescence adulthood GBH Rush comparison, but I will say I would still rather listen to City Baby Attacked by Rats than Hemispheres, but that's just me. We will
Let's
get more
table
in
this discussion for the Rush episode.
let's table this discussion and let's get back into 1971. As I
Let's
mentioned,
do it.
only one more episode after this to talk about the year. You've got two more opportunities to tell us what was happening in the culture, Dave. So let's go to your cultural corner and tell us all about it.
Dave's Control. All right. Well, we're getting a little bit abstract. Maybe we're on the fringes, and so I'm bringing that into the cultural corner today because we've talked about the year broadly. We've talked about the other bands more in depth that we for the songs. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Alice Coltrane herself. Fascinating woman. Definitely spend some time yourselves, listeners. But what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about the fact that we have a a song here that features the tambura, which is a Hindu instrument, an Indian instrument. It's like a pared down sitar. It's made of a gourd or a pumpkin, and it's got a very long neck and four strings. And it's really interesting because you hear this in the background of the song the whole time. And so looking into this and looking at Cultural Corner, um, I recognize there's a connection here to what's happening in the culture. This is 1971, but we've gone through the 60s of this cultural revolution and this upheaval, and a lot of the youth, especially, were exploring other religions and Eastern religions. And we get to 1971, and we have Alice Coltrane pulling in this Indian instrument, not just sonically, but she becomes a Hindu spiritual leader. Like this is all very authentic for her. It's not a commercial thing, right? She's not just trying it on for a song. This is part of who she becomes. But why was she interested in that? How did she know about that? What was going on? Well, the Beatles, um, other celebrities are hanging out with Maharishi and other spiritual leaders. Um, I'll read you a few excerpts here. In the 60s, the counterculture movement to a surge of interest in Eastern religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, transcendental meditation, as more and more Americans looked for alternatives to mainstream Christian churches. They found too authoritarian and irrelevant in these changing and uncertain times. Um, this was fueled by things like the civil rights movement, anti war sentiment, and a desire for alternative spiritual experiences, and sometimes led to the formation of communal living groups and widespread exposure to practices like meditation and spiritual teachings, things that weren't really part of the conversation. The 60s saw many people, particularly young people, searching for these new spiritual paths. Traditional churches were too rigid and authoritarian, weren't connected to what was going on with social upheaval. Eastern religion were seen as just better equipped to address a yearning for transcendence, offer a more meaningful experience than any of the Western faiths. The Eastern view of spirituality is just very different than Western. And so, for people who had grown up not even understanding that there was Eastern religion, to start opening your mind with drugs and psychedelics and being open to all these new counterculture things, Eastern religion just falls right. Your beat movement in the 40s and the 50s had already laid groundwork for embracing Eastern religions and rejecting materialist values. Many of the intentional Eastern religious principles, such as Zen Buddhism or Hindu practices. So that's the bottom line, right? In the 60s, Eastern religion becomes part of the counterculture conversation and by extension part of the American experience. And so that leads to this moment where Alice Coltrane adds this element to her music, but it's not that she added it to her music. It's that she is changing spiritually and she's bringing herself to her music is a reflection of herself, and this is another aspect of that, but I think it's really relevant to the times. um, but I also thought that the tempura itself was a really interesting instrument, because what the purpose of the tempura is to create a drone sound in the background, and the four strings are tuned a certain way, and you just pluck them in a certain order and a certain timing and rhythm. But the player does that over and over and over again, and they leave this um, like a bed that the primary performance is built on top of. And the point or the goal of the tempurist um, is to support what's called the raga, which is the main thing that's happening. And they do this by this drone sound. It's also the same kind of a sound that comes from a pipe organ. It's that same sonic effect. But tempura has just the four strings, and the way they're plucked, the by the time you get to the fourth string, the first one is reverb, the second one, the third one, and so you get all these overtones. And so the goal is to have overtones, as many overtones as you can at the same time, while keeping that rhythm and same pattern that you established in the beginning, and then just being constant. This can go on for like an hour in Indian performances. And so a tempurist has to be very, very like similar to a drummer with timing, but maybe more rigid.
Huh.
And point is kind of to not to notice them. So it's a real duality. It's really interesting. I was really turned on by learning about this instrument. It's pretty cool.
That I didn't know. I've been listening to this music for years and I didn't know any of that. So that is a good example of why I love doing this with you so much. Like that is great. You teed this up perfectly. But also, what a time to be alive where the Middle Eastern thought and religion and thinking and temperament was a part of pop culture. I mean, Alice Coltrane obviously isn't pop, but the Beatles and the Stones and everybody that adopted it were part of pop culture versus today when we have fucking Taylor Swift and, you know, K-pop. You know, what very
I'll
very
be fucking
different.
with Tay Tay.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means, but I don't have a young daughter, so so
Fair.
you teed it up perfectly. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Alice Cooper. I was about to say Alice Coltrane,
We'll
and
get to Cooper
and
later. He's on the list.
he's coming, and then we'll get into the song and the record. So Alice Coltrane was born on August 27th, 1937. She was many things. She was a pianist. She was one of the very few harpists in jazz history. She was a composer. She was a band leader. She was a spiritual leader. And frankly, she was a genius. And as Dave indicated, her life was far too interesting and complicated to do it justice here. So go dig into the life and the deep discography of Coltrane's music, because it is incredible. Stay away from Alice Cooper's '80s output, though. That's just plain bad.
Nobody
But
needs that.
so for our purpose and in the context of Alice Coltrane's impact on heavy music, we're going to simply focus on her fourth studio album and its title track, which are both called Journey into Satchidananda.
Very good.
That's
Very
as good
good.
as it's going to get, and it's not going to get better than that in terms of my pronunciation. Like most of Alice Coltrane's work, the album could be classified as several genres, but I think probably the closest is post bebop or spiritual jazz or avant garde. Those are sort of, I think, the closest that capture, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the main thing is that her music, again, as you indicated, is always steeped deeply in emotion, exploration, and transcendence. The album was recorded at her home studio in Dix Hills, New York in the fall of 1970 and features Alice on piano and harp, the great Pharoah Sanders on saxophone, Cecil McBee on bass, Rashid Ali on drums, Tulsi Sen-Gupta on tanpura, and Majid Shabazz on bells and tambourine. The album was released in February of 1971 on Impulse Records to significant acclaim at the time and ever since. Just to give a kind of a perspective on the critical perspective on the album, I pulled a few quotes here and just some to frame it a little bit. All Music gave the record a 5 out of 5 stars, calling it a remarkable album and necessary for anyone interested in the development of modal and experimental jazz. The 2020 edition of Rolling Stone magazine's 500 greatest albums of all time, that is albums full stop, not jazz albums, the 500 greatest albums of all time, listed it at number 446. And Pitchfork gave the record a perfect 10 score in their 2019 review, in which critic Josephine Livingston wrote, Coltrane takes us across uncharted territories in jazz composition, drawing from multiple cultures and diverse instruments, but she also shows us emotion in motion. Because she refuses to stay in one key, instead treating the album's theme as a set of reoccurring melodic shapes, the very texture of Journey is defined by transition, process, and flow. Its music has no beginning and no end, which I thought was pretty great. Journey to Satchidananda was composed and played on the harp that was gifted to Alice by her late husband, John Coltrane, who never got to hear her play it.
Oh, man.
As he died less than 2 years into their marriage. And by the time she was ready to record this record, she was still deeply grieving John's death. When she recorded the album, that grief was very sonically present. And as we discussed last week when talking about Eddie Hazel and Funkadelic's Maggot Brain, that, in my opinion, is what makes this music so fucking heavy. Illustrative of her influence, which was massive, and specifically on heavy music, and obviously experimental music, from Sonic Youth to Radiohead. You can, knowing Alice Coltrane, you can go back and listen to those records, and you can hear her influence. But some direct nods to Alice Coltrane. The great Paul Weller of the Jam and Style Council dedicated his "Song for Alice" to her on his
Oh,
2008 album, 22 Dreams. The
oh,
great Sunn, Dave's Hoodie Sunn, one of our collective favorite bands. Their song Alice from their 2009 album Monoliths and Dimensions was inspired by Alice Coltrane, which you can immediately hear not only in that song, but in a lot of their music. And then the great DJ, for lack of a better framing, Flying Lotus, who is actually, and I did not know this, is Alice Coltrane's grandnephew.
yeah.
His song Aunti's Harp from his 2010 record is dedicated to her. So, Dave, that was a lot. I've been very excited to hear your opinion on this music and to hear if you had any relation to it prior to this conversation. So give me that, as well as how you think Alice Coltrane, her music broadly speaking, and Journey to Satchidananda in particular fits into our conversation about heavy.
Okay. That is a lot there to digest and to respond to. So, from the top, never heard of Alice Coltrane. I was never really, I never knew very much about the artists that I was listening to, especially when I got into jazz. It was kind of pre internet. And then as the internet became a thing, I went into being a mechanic. So I was about as far away from technology as you could be. And a Harley mechanic. So I'm working on 1940s tractors, right? We're
They weren't
talking
listening to Alice Coltrane at the Harley shop.
weirdly. I know, right? I look back at that. I'm like, maybe they were, and I just missed it. Um, so I never knew who she was, right? And this was the first time I had heard this song and looked into her and blew me away. All of it blew me away. Uh, Skipping to the end, is this heavy? Does this count? Yes. Yes, it does. Does it count because it's got driving power chords? No. But it's got the emotion that you talked about, but it also has a slow, intentional, that bass line is great. It's a little groovy, right? It's got a just a spin, a little English on the end, um, which I really appreciate. And the the emotion that she brings, the pace of the song, and maybe it's still saying the emotion, but there's a certain intensity that I, I listened to it first before I looked anything up, and I just felt like, wow, like I just felt like there's a lot happening here.
Yeah.
And then when I read who she was, and it was like, that's what I was hearing. I was hearing all of this backstory, the grieving, the spiritual path that she's on, the turmoil of the civil rights music. This is the civil rights movement. This is a black woman in 1971 who was born in the 30s, right? Like, she is the civil rights era. Her
Yeah.
life is a core sample of that, and she's lived through where we are in that arc, where all the tumult has been. Um, it just really, really comes through. It's very heavy to me. But shockingly, she plays the shit out of that harp. Like, I see harpists and I think, okay, whatever. Man, there was a moment where I'm like, did Ingve J. Malmsteen just join the chat? Like, this is all like This is the soloist, the guitar
She's
soloist
shredding.
solo.
Yeah.
She was shredding. It was amazing, and it wasn't long enough to be overdone like Ingve, but it was enough to for you to know that she was telling you who she is and what you're in, what you're in for. Uh,
Yeah.
she knew what she was doing, and if that was a harpist, and she's one of the few jazz harpists, I'm not going to try to be a jazz harpist. Are you kidding
I'm
me?
picking up the harp.
No. But when you've got like 100 awesome jazz sax players, you're like, okay, I can try to be the 101st, right? But like, I'm not touching that harp.
Do you think Journey to Satchidananda is what people play when they go into Guitar Center and test a harp the way people play Stairway to Heaven?
No, but it is what they test the tempura on when they're going to.
I am so glad you gave the context on the tempura because again, I didn't know anything about that instrument until you just educated me about it, but it is so clear. It's deep in the mix, but it is so present in the mix, and that along with Cecil McBee's bass line that you mentioned underneath what Alice is doing on the harp and then Pharoah Sanders is doing on the saxophone. It's just incredible. And she is the perfect kind of virtuoso, or this whole band is the
Oh
perfect kind
man,
of, because they're not the Ingve, right?
right,
They're not being showy.
right.
They are playing from a deep place in their soul, and it's like Eddie Hazel on Maggot Brain. And I think it's really interesting that apologies to Janis Joplin, but for me, probably the two most deeply emotionally resonant songs that we have talked about so far through 37, however many episodes, are Alice Coltrane and Funk and Maggot Brain. Two instrumentals where you are hearing people bare their soul through their instrument without a single word of context,
Right.
which is by definition heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and adding to the weight, Pharaoh Saunders,
Yeah.
like, okay, Charlie Hayden plays on this album, not on this song, but on this album.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yep.
Rashid, he played with John Coltrane. Like you, something that happens with these jazz albums is like I'll listen to a jazz album and I'm like, man, that's tight and that's good. And I see the players, I'm like, oh yeah, of
Of
course,
course. Right.
right? And these players, they'll have 100 albums to their credit because they do all these sessions with all these different combinations of other greats. And so when you talk about experimental music and you put these names on that overarching mantle, it's not noise pop. It's not noise. It's how can we take different methodologies that we have developed over our careers and play with some or all of them in different orders or in a way that comes up with something that we didn't know before. And that bravery and talent, but also like solemnity. It feels like to go into this endeavor, you have to be serious about it, not in a fanboy way and not in an obsessive way. You just have to be just you're just really serious about it. And it felt a little bit serious.
Yeah.
Just the not the song, but the sense of the emotion that came through from the song, hearing the tapestry that these players created. It ends, and you're like, I felt myself like, oh wow, okay, because
Yeah.
I
I
was
think
on the edge of my seat.
to me, what the I'm curious in what context you personally as a listener put this music or this record? Meaning, you were talking about Rush earlier, and my personal enjoyment in music generally comes in one of two ways, and maybe this is this is everybody, but for me, primarily two ways. One way is I am very cognizant of the players and what they're playing and how difficult it is to play and how talented they are. It's almost academic where I'm having like, this is so good and these guys are so good that I can hear them working, and this is impressive. And that's more or less where I would put Rush for me. And then there is the other one that is almost indescribable, where it just hits me emotionally, where I am having a reaction to it and I don't care about how they're playing it or what they're playing, or it just washes over me. And a lot of jazz does the former. There's a lot of jazz where I'm like, wow, that sounds really difficult and that's impressive. But this is the latter. This is all like my emotional reaction to what I am hearing and feeling as her emotional output.
Hmm.
So I'm curious if that resonates to you, but also again, where this fits for you in your jazz. You've been listening to jazz for a long time, as you mentioned. So where does
Yeah.
this kind of fit on the spectrum of how you listen to jazz and the different kinds of jazz you listen to?
That's interesting. So this didn't my spectrum has expanded with knowing that this exists.
Yeah.
I didn't know about it, and I didn't know you could do this, but here it is. Um, when I let me see, how do I want to say this? My relationship with music is primarily emotional, and I can appreciate a complex, talented soundscape even as I'm emotionally communing with it.
Sure, of course,
The
of course.
first thing that happens is the emotional, right? Like I'll feel a connection to the music, but sometimes it's because it's just so simple and fundamental, right? Um, Power chords, right?
Ramones. Yeah.
The Ramones or Smoke on the Water,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or uh, Iron Man. And I know that we have different feelings about that, but it moves me. And also Kind of Blue and Take Five and just name all the other greats. Uh, yeah, it takes a complicated set of, it takes a lot of complexity to play the music. It takes an order of magnitude more to create that music, right? So if I want to get academic about Take Five, it's all right there. But that's not what, like, I'm grooving to it, right? I love the music. And so this, I had a very similar reaction to. I'm listening to it. I'm like, oh, there's that bass line. Oh, what is that instrument? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, okay. It's got a little um spice to it. Not heat, but some flavor, some
Yeah.
seasoning. It's got some seasoning to it.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, that's cool. And then the actual, like, the harp solo, for lack of a better term, I'm like, oh shit, there's fucking talent everywhere. Like, it hit me then how, and then I worked backwards from there. But I'm like, this is great. I like this.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. My where I categorize this record in my listening is interesting because it's not in my pile of Coltrane and Mingus and Monk and Miles and all that stuff. That's not how I think about this. When I want to listen to jazz, let's just say broadly, this is not in the mix of consideration. Where this sits for me is more in the ambient space of like Claude Scholes and Terry
Mm.
Riley and Brian Eno. It's kind of more over
Ooh.
there, which doesn't make sense in terms of how the music was created necessary, well, at all, but in terms of when I listen to it, how I listen to it, how I connect with it, it's more in this atmospheric ambient world than it is
No.
in even the quieter jazz stuff, which I never really thought about until we decided, I added this to the list and we decided to talk about it. So you now have a new relationship with this record.
Uh,
Where do you think it might fit into your listening habits?
I would squarely put it in both camps. I would
Mm,
listen to this as much as I would listen to the kind of lo-fi beats that I listen to sometimes in the background, but I would put this on after Take Five or Kind of Blue or you know Giant Steps or anything. Um, this strikes me as a straight up jazz album.
hmm
I hear the jazz, but because of that tempura, it's got some ambient quality to it, some
Yeah.
ambient that bass layer. And so it really, for me, it's a foot in each camp.
hmm Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. You love this, right?
Yeah, it's
I knew
really,
you would love this. I was
and
really
it's like
excited.
I wouldn't listen to Kind of Blue in an ambient way.
Right,
Like
right, right.
I'm trying to think to what other jazz would do that for me, and I'm sure there is. I mean, it's like Vince Guaraldi. I listen to a lot of Vince Guaraldi, and I really like him. And I'll listen, but I can also throw it on in the background and just recognize that it's on back there. Much of the music that I listen to, though, the jazz that I've listened to, I've heard enough that I'm familiar enough with it that I'm looking forward to the song I'm listening to. I'm enjoying the listen. And
Right.
so that defeats the purpose of ambiance, right? The ambiance isn't to listen to, it's to feel. And
That's really
it,
well said.
you know,
That's really well said. And that's I'll say it a third time. That's really well said because that's I think what I was trying to say with where I put this in my listening habits because I am feeling it, not listening to it. Which is super interesting. I think again in the context of heavy music and how we're defining heavy and what that means, we've started more and more in recent weeks attaching heaviness to mood and feeling and emotion, anger and frustration and sadness and grief and all of those things. And I think that's interesting. And I think both that emotional part of heaviness and the sonic ambient quality that we've talked about here is important are important for us to remember as we move forward and get into more drone metal and instrumental bands and bands like Neurosis and Pelican and Isis and all of that stuff. I think along with Maggot Brain, I think Journey to Satchidananda. See, I'm going to say it as many times as I can now because I think I've got it.
doing it good. Yeah.
Thanks. I think those two songs, along with One of These Days, Pink Floyd, that we talked about, those again might not be three obvious songs if you look at the overall arc of the song, the kind of songs we've been talking about. But I think they're all really important examples that we will go back and reference as
hmm
we get into these artists like Sunn, like Sonic Youth, like
hmm
Radiohead, that were influenced by all of this stuff and how they how they were heavy with that influence.
For sure.
Yeah.
And when you think about something like experimental music, that's standing on the shoulders of the giants that came before me um, continuum. So the experimental stuff that comes out that becomes drone metal doesn't exist without stuff like this
Right.
before it. And there's other stuff too, but this is the stuff that's the in the Venn diagram of heavy and a base for drone, like a foundation for drone.
Right.
Um,
For sure. And her biography, part of which we very briefly touched on, but as a deeply religious person, as a spiritual leader, as a mother, as a wife, as a band leader, all of those things contribute to its heaviness. So many of the artists we are talking about, we don't generally get into who they were as people necessarily, but a lot of them were like, oh, I was working at a burger joint and I formed a band, and or my high school band became popular and now we're Mudhoney or whatever.
right,
Like
right. Or I grew up in a factory town in England, and there were no options, so I cut off my fingers and became Black Sabbath.
that's a different kind of heaviness, right?
Right,
And
but
and and they
it's
contribute
also
to.
like right. That's a different kind of happiness. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Anything else on Alice Coltrane or Journey to Satchidananda or anything
Just
else?
I was really wondering how this was going to fold in because I've seen it on the list all this time, and I purposely didn't touch it until time because I wanted to just open the seal fresh and get it fresh and have you get the reaction fresh.
Yeah.
Um, what more can you say? I mean, the woman herself, the music itself, the rest of the band, the times. This is each one of those things is heavy enough to be on our list, but there's all of them.
Yeah, it's true. This album, for whatever reason, when I encountered it several years ago, happened to be the one that I don't know if it was right. I don't know how it. She was a name. She was just one of those names I'd always known, and at some point I had to explore her catalog, and I did. And this happened to be the first one album that I heard. So this is the one that I always go back to and listen to, and is in my regular rotation. But her whole discography is great. So anybody that's even remotely interested, just dive in anywhere because
Right.
it's all great.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm
okay,
gonna enjoy unpacking that box very slowly.
yeah, I knew that this would resonate with you, so I'm glad you dug in. And again, the cultural corner deep dive that you are required to do every week is not only appreciated and educational, but adds another layer to me, to not obviously to our conversation, but to my appreciation of most of these songs that I've known for years, if not decades. So that's very cool.
Awesome. Well, and this is really another thing that's happening, outside of our podcast is that my daughter and her two best friends, dads, and I have all become the dad. And one of them is a total audiophile with a crank, Victrola and everything, and has just way deep in speakers and preamps and like all the analog stuff. But he's been into it for years.
Mhm.
He went to Rudy Van Gelder's studio. I don't know if you know him. He was
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
jazz producer in New Jersey and was just or Kansas. I can't even remember where it was. Anyway, just like way, way, way deep. And so we've been getting together lately and having listening parties and just bringing over records because they both have record players. And while I don't have a record player, I do have some records still. But their catalogs are so big and there's so little time to do this. I'm definitely bringing this to the listening party.
Awesome.
This I really am interested to get their take on.
Well, I am. I would ask that you bring a report back to the podcast about how that goes, and let's
Yeah,
revisit that on a future episode because that would be really
yeah,
fun.
I will.
Okay, well, it's time, and I think this might be the only song that has a fighting chance in Song v Song, uh, or at least has had a fighting chance for a long time. Song v Song is where we pit our current song champion against tonight's episode. Dave's champ is currently Kingdom Come by Sir Lord Baltimore. That was from episode 28. Mine is Won't Get Fooled Again by The Who from episode 35. I'm going to go first because I want to build some anticipation for your answer. For me, I think I'm going to stick with The Who. Just because, for no good reason. I just feel like it's the right thing to do in the context of the heavy conversation. So The Who's gonna win the day for me. But I'm very curious what you're going to say, because Sir Lord Baltimore was a new find for you. You fell in love with that band.
Mm-hmm.
You have waved the flag for Sir Lord Baltimore for multiple weeks now. And I don't think anything has come close to toppling them.
Five
What?
5 episodes. This is
Five?
our sixth
Okay, okay,
episode,
not as long as I thought. Then not as
but
long.
that's a long time.
Yeah, yeah. So how's Alice
Um,
Coltrane? Does Alice Coltrane have a chance, Dave?
there's a chance. Look, Sir Lord Baltimore has retired. Alice is my
Let's
champion this
go,
week.
baby. Let's go.
Uh, I was really moved by this. I was
Uh,
really like touched, moved, affected. That's it. Uh, more than I thought that I would be, and maybe because I just left it alone and ignored it until I got to it. I didn't really have a lot of build up. Right, I wasn't expecting it to be something great. I was expecting it to be something new, and
well said.
maybe because of that, I was just open to whatever happened, and it turned out to be great. So the experience of experiencing it for the first time was um, uplifting and energizing. And so, what can I say? I mean, Lord Baltimore's been a good sidekick for me and a crutch, but you know, Lord Baltimore's in my quiver. I go back to Lord Baltimore, but tonight it's Alice.
I have a big goofy smile on my face. That makes me so happy, and to proud to have introduced you to this music because she's amazing. But also because you are taking her forward as your champion, it gives us reason to continue to talk about her in the context of our conversation, which is great. I don't know how we are going to do that next week. However, next week we are getting back to big dumb power chords. We are talking about Budgie and their song Guts. There is not a lot of nuance to that music, but I felt like they were a band that have an
I,
interesting enough place in the history of heavy music that we should talk about them. So we will get into Budgie next week. That will be the final song episode from 1971. But again, it does mean that episode will be followed by a complete album conversation from Black Sabbath's 1971 record, which is Master of Reality. So we got a couple of good ones coming up. That will be next time. In the meantime, stay heavy.
okay, thank you. Bye.